I will not do that. I will not trade my dignity for a promotion. I will not be manipulated. I am telling everyone what you have been doing. Imani Carter shouted at her manager when he asked her, I have been thinking about your potential, but sometimes opportunity requires a little flexibility. He said to Imani, you are ambitious, and ambition comes with personal investments. The manager was misusing his power, and he wanted personal favors from Imani Carter, which is why he stopped her promotion. After refusing many times, Imani at least stands for herself and decides to expose him. She said, I will tell everyone what you've been doing all the time with me. The manager stumbles and says, you just cannot tell anyone. Imani storms out of the office. Murmurs ripple through coworkers. Some glance at her with shock, others with doubt, others secretly impressed. Imani Carter is a hard worker and an intelligent girl who is a teller at Oakwood Financial Bank. Her father is retired and his health is not so good. Her mother, who works part-time, has two siblings, Micah Carter, a 10-year-old brother, and Aaliyah Carter, 13-years-old sister. Imani is taking all responsibilities of her family. Her father's pension barely pays the medicine bills, and her mother's part-time work barely helps her. Imani was paying for everything: groceries, school fees, and electricity bills and medication. The next morning, Imani barely woke up from bad dreams. She had a bad day yesterday, and it was continuously hurting her mind with different thoughts. What if I lost the job if I did not get the justice? How will I pay the bills? My brother and sister will not go to school, my father's medication, and these thoughts were torturing her. She came out of her room and saw her father was already sitting at the table, a worn blanket draped over his shoulders, and the faint coughs that had become part of his daily rhythm echoed through the small living room. Her mother is still in her robe, hovering nearby, arranging medicine on the counter. Looked at her siblings, they are smiling and preparing for school. After looking at this, Imani inhaled, and thoughts of leaving the job or doubts about whether I should go to the office or not disappeared. Just imagine how torturous it is when you know you will be harassed again and again, but you have to be there for your family. Imani was going through the same situation, but she was helpless. Imani did her breakfast, kissed her parents and siblings goodbye, grabbed her briefcase, and headed to the subway. The streets were busy, but in the crowd, she felt alone. She was going to face the manager who had been making her life miserable for months. But she tries to cover from that and focus on today's agenda at the office. Unfinished reports, and an upcoming meeting with positive energy. Hoping for her coworkers to support her, but she didn't know what was going to happen with her. At the office, what happened was completely against her expectations. Her coworkers, some of them ignored Imani, and some of them gave her cautious glances. They were whispering about yesterday's incident and promotions. Imani settled at her desk, arranging her files neatly. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had been working on the Henderson account for weeks, delivering results that should have put her in line for a promotion. Instead, she faced constant harassment, belittling comments, and veiled threats. Some whispered, I don't think anyone really believes her, she's just overreacting. Imani heard the words. She swallowed hard but kept her composure. She couldn't afford distractions, not when her family depended on her. By the afternoon, Whitmore, her manager, made his presence known, leaning casually against her cubicle. He said to Imani, Imani, I hope you're not letting your emotions get in the way of your work. You wouldn't want to ruin a good reputation. Imani went through a lot of thoughts going through her mind, family dependency on this job, and she was helpless. So she tolerated it, for now, but each comment, each subtle intimidation, weighed more heavily on her conscience. Back home, the apartment was quiet but tense. She sat for a moment, exhausted, and thinking about the office, the whispering, the looks, the unfairness of it all. Her anger simmered quietly beneath the surface. For months she had tolerated this because she needed the job, because she needed to protect her family. But deep inside, she knew a breaking point was approaching. Imani had peace in her life only for a few seconds every day in her life, and those were in the morning after waking up, lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom. The apartment was quiet at that hour. That silence was the only time of day that truly belonged to her, a day before the incident. Imani's alarm rang at 5:15 every morning. She never ignored it, she could not afford to. And then she pushed the blanket aside and stood up. And she went to the kitchen and made tea for herself. She opened the cabinet where her father's medicines were kept. She checked the strips carefully, 2 tablets left. On the refrigerator door, a paper calendar hung with bills marked in red. Rent in 5 days, electricity overdue, school fees next Monday, and her father's clinic appointment circled twice. Imani prepared tea for her father and walked to the living room. He was sitting in his old chair, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the television without really watching it. His cough echoed in the small space. It was deep and heavy. Every time he coughed, Imani felt something tighten inside her chest. He tried to smile when he saw her. "You work too hard," he said gently. She smiled back. "And you worry too much. Soon I will get a promotion and everything will be changed." He laughed softly, but it turned into another cough. She placed the tea in his hands and adjusted the blanket around his shoulders. By the time she left for work, she was already tired, but she never showed it. The office felt like a different world. It was clean and polished. The air conditioning was strong. The lights were bright and unforgiving. People sat behind organized desks, speaking in controlled voices. Everything looked professional. Everything felt distant. Imani arrived at 8:45, as she did every day. She placed her bag down, turned on her computer, and reviewed her schedule. Her inbox was already full. She had been leading the Henderson account for weeks. The project was complex, but she had handled it with care and precision. She had stayed late several nights to finalize reports. She had corrected mistakes others overlooked. She knew her work was solid. Across the room, 2 coworkers were whispering. She did not look directly at them, but she sensed their glances. Promotions had been finalized recently. Her name had not been included. She had expected that outcome still, and seeing the official announcement hurt. Her performance reviews had always been positive. Words like dedicated, efficient, and reliable appeared often. Yet somehow, when opportunities opened, she remained where she was. Later that morning, Mr. Whitmore walked through the office. He stopped at another employee's desk and praised her for a summary report. Imani recognized the document immediately. She had written the original draft, and the other employee had formatted it and added a few sentences. Imani kept her eyes on her screen. She told herself that recognition was not the priority. Stability was the priority. Her family depended on her paycheck. That mattered more than praise. At lunch, most employees gathered in small groups. Imani usually sat alone or joined whoever was nearby. That day, she overheard quiet laughter. "She's always so serious," someone said softly. "Sometimes she seems angry," another replied. And the words were not loud. They were not meant for her. But she heard them clearly, serious, angry. She had learned that speaking firmly could be misunderstood, that confidence could be labeled attitude, that frustration, even when justified, could be twisted into aggression. So she kept her voice measured. Her expressions were controlled. Neutral felt safer. In the afternoon, work intensified, deadlines approached, emails demanded attention. Mr. Whitmore finally came to her desk, and he leaned slightly closer than necessary, his tone calm but deliberate. "Still ambitious, I hope," he said quietly. Imani did not look up immediately. "I'm focused on completing the Henderson report." He tapped her desk lightly. "Ambition requires the right kind of support." The sentence lingered in the air after he walked away. She understood what he meant. The suggestions had not been direct, but they had been clear. Over the past months, he had hinted at special meetings outside office hours, at private conversations, opportunities tied to personal closeness. She had always declined politely. Each refusal seemed to create distance between her and advancement. When she returned home that evening, the apartment felt warm but heavy. Her brother ran toward her with a drawing. It showed a stick figure wearing a badge and smiling widely. "That's you," he said proudly. She laughed softly and hugged him. "I look important." "You are important," he replied. Her sister watched her carefully. You look tired," she said. "It's just work," Imani answered. Her mother sat at the table with bills spread out again. "We might delay the clinic payment," her mother suggested quietly. Imani shook her head. "No. We'll manage." Later that night, she checked her bank balance. The numbers were tight, very tight, but still enough for now. When she finally lay down in bed, exhaustion pressed against her. She replayed moments from the office. The whispers, the overlooked credit, the subtle comments, the promotion list is without her name. She had to maintain a careful tone at all times. She knew she worked harder than many of her colleagues. She knew she had earned advancement through skill and consistency. She also knew that her skin color shaped how some people saw her. It shaped how her words were interpreted. It shaped the patience they had for her. She carried her home on her shoulders. She carried her workplace expectations with controlled strength. She carried her silence because speaking up felt risky, but something inside her was shifting. The pressure was not loud. It was quiet and steady, like water filling a closed container. Every day she endured. Every day she calculated. Every day she chose stability over confrontation. For now, this was her normal world. And in this world, survival came first. The promotion meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, and Imani had been preparing for it quietly for weeks. She updated her reports, printed client feedback emails, and reviewed performance metrics late at night after her family had gone to sleep. She did not tell anyone at home about the possibility of advancement. Hope felt dangerous when stability was fragile. That morning, the office felt different. Conversations were softer, more careful. People checked their emails more often than usual. At exactly 2 p.m., a message from Mr. Whitmore appeared in her inbox, asking her to come to his office. Her fingers paused above the keyboard before she stood. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but forced herself to breathe evenly. As she walked across the office floor toward his glass-walled office, she sensed eyes following her. Some coworkers looked up briefly, then quickly looked away. She knocked once and entered. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. Whitmore sat comfortably behind his desk, leaning back as if the meeting were routine. He asked her to sit, and she did, holding her folder carefully on her lap. He began by acknowledging her consistency and reliability. His tone was calm, almost warm, and he mentioned the senior associate opening and the salary increase that came with it. For a moment her heart lifted, but she kept her face neutral. Then his tone shifted. He explained that promotions were not just about work performance, but also about trust and personal alignment. The words were vague, but the meaning was not new. He stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped beside her chair, invading her personal space. He spoke quietly, on suggesting that a private dinner or an informal evening together would demonstrate commitment. The room suddenly felt smaller. Imani stood immediately, putting distance between them. She reminded him firmly that she had rejected similar suggestions before. Her voice remained controlled, but her pulse raced. Whitmore's expression hardened. He insisted he was offering her a valuable opportunity and implied that refusing might limit her future in the company. And he warned that she could be excluded from important projects. The threat was subtle but clear. For a brief moment, images flashed in her mind. Her father's medicine bottles lined up on the kitchen shelf, her brother's school fees, the red marks on the calendar where bills were due. The weight of responsibility pressed down heavily, but another feeling rose above it: exhaustion, not physical exhaustion, but the exhaustion of bending without breaking. And she told him quietly that she would not trade her dignity for advancement. The calmness in her voice surprised even her. Whitmore warned her to be careful with accusations. She replied that she had remained silent for months because she needed the job, but she would not remain silent anymore. His voice grew sharper. He told her to lower her tone. Instead, her voice rose. She spoke about the pattern she had noticed, the way her work was credited to others, the way her promotion was delayed, the repeated invitations framed as professional support. The words came faster now, fueled by months of restraint. Through the glass walls, coworkers had begun to notice the raised voices. A few stood slightly in their chairs, pretending to organize papers while watching. Whitmore declared the conversation over and moved toward the door, but Imani reached it first. She opened it and stepped out into the open office space. The sudden movement caused typing to slow. Heads turned openly now. If he wanted silence, she would remove the privacy. She said clearly, in a voice loud enough for the room to hear, that he had been harassing her for months and offering professional advancement in exchange for personal meetings. The words felt heavy but necessary. The office went completely quiet. A pen fell somewhere, someone's chair creaked, no one spoke. Whitmore followed her out and accused her of making serious, false allegations. He insisted emotions were clouding her judgment, and his tone was controlled again, carefully professional. Imani felt her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She knew the risk. She knew this could cost her the job her family depended on, but stepping back would mean accepting what had been happening. She repeated that she was telling the truth and that she would not stay quiet any longer. She looked around the room. She searched for understanding in the faces around her. Instead, she saw shock, discomfort, and doubt. And some avoided eye contact, others exchanged quick whispers. No one stepped forward. The silence felt colder than the confrontation inside the office. Whitmore adjusted his tie and calmly reassured the staff that her claims were untrue. A few employees nodded awkwardly, as if wanting the situation to disappear. Imani felt alone in a way she had not expected. Speaking up had felt powerful for a moment, but the lack of immediate support cut deeply. Still, she did not withdraw her words. She said she had stated what needed to be said and walked back to her desk slowly, aware of every gaze following her. The room's usual noise resumed in fragments, uneven and forced. Keyboards clicked hesitantly. Phones rang and were answered too quickly. She sat down and stared at her computer screen, but the words blurred. Her hands were cold. There was no returning to normal now. She had crossed the line between silent endurance and open resistance. And nothing in her life, at work or at home, would remain untouched by what she had just done. The next morning, the office felt colder than usual. The co-workers who were supposed to stand with her instead started targeting her. No one said anything directly, but the silence around Imani was deliberate. When she walked past the reception desk, the usual greeting did not come. Two co-workers who normally shared project updates with her kept their heads down. It was not loud hostility, and it was a distance, careful distance. By mid-morning, the whispers began. She heard her name in fragments. Overreacted. Misunderstood. Risky accusation. The words floated through the air like smoke. No one confronted her openly. Instead, the tone of emails shifted. Messages that once included her now exclude her. A meeting invite for a client presentation arrived without her name on it. At noon, she learned that the Henderson account had been reassigned. No explanation. Just a brief notice from management stating that, for operational efficiency, the project would now be handled by another team member. She stared at the screen for a long moment. That account had been hers from the beginning. She had built it carefully. Losing it felt intentional. When Whitmore walked past her desk that afternoon, he did not stop. He did not speak, but his silence felt calculated. It was a quiet warning. Later, in the break room, two employees fell silent when she entered. And one of them finally spoke, not directly to her, but loudly enough to be heard. "People shouldn't throw accusations around," she said. "It damages reputations." Imani poured her coffee slowly and replied in a calm voice, "Silence damages people, too." The room went quiet again. By the end of the week, the tension had spread. A rumor circulated that she had fabricated the story because she was upset about not being promoted. Someone suggested she had misunderstood professional mentorship, and someone else implied she was trying to create trouble. What hurt most was not the criticism. It was the disbelief. At home, she tried to act normal. She helped her sister study for exams and reminded her brother to complete his homework. She listened to her mother talk about grocery prices rising again. But the strain showed in small ways. She became quieter at dinner. She checked her phone more often. She slept less. One evening, her father noticed the change. "You're carrying something," he said gently. "It's just work," she replied. He studied her face for a moment but did not press further. He understood pride. He understood responsibility. The following Monday, something shifted. A junior employee named Claire asked to speak with her privately. They met near the staircase where fewer people passed by. Claire looked nervous. "I don't know if I should say this," she began, "but he asked me to dinner last week, said it would help my career." Imani felt a slow wave of recognition. She did not look surprised, She only asked, "Did you go?" Claire shook her head quickly. "No, I said I had plans." "Did he mention promotion?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. That conversation stayed with Imani all day. It confirmed what she already knew. It was not isolated, it was a pattern. A few days later, another employee, this time from a different department, avoided eye contact during a meeting. Afterward, and she sent Imani a short message. "Can we talk?" They met in the parking lot after work. The woman spoke quickly, as if afraid of being overheard. "He's been doing the same thing to me," she said. "I thought it was just me." The words felt heavy, but validating. Slowly, the narrative in the office began to crack. At first, it was subtle. Conversations stopped being dismissive and became uncertain. Some employees who had avoided her began making brief eye contact again, not supportive, and but less hostile. Meanwhile, Whitmore grew more controlled in public. He avoided being alone with female employees. He kept his office door open during meetings. His behavior had changed, but not because he had been innocent. The tension reached another level when one of the women he approached happened to mention it casually in a group setting. She did not accuse him directly. She simply laughed uncomfortably and said, "I guess dinner invitations are part of the promotion process around here." The joke did not land well. Silence followed. That silence felt different from the one Imani experienced before. It was not disbelief. It was a realization. Outside the office, something else began to grow. Claire decided to share her experience anonymously on social media. She did not mention names, but she described the pattern clearly. Promotion hints tied to private meetings, career threats after refusal. And the post gained quite a lot of attention. A few others shared similar stories in comments. Imani saw the post late at night while scrolling on her phone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from recognition that the story was moving beyond office walls. Within days, someone connected the description to their company. Questions appeared online. Former employees added their own accounts. Back at work, our management called for a general meeting about professional boundaries. It was framed as routine policy reinforcement, but everyone understood the timing. The atmosphere shifted again. Some coworkers approached Imani quietly. One apologized for doubting her. Another admitted they had been afraid to speak. No one offered dramatic support, but small acknowledgments began to appear. Still, the pressure did not disappear. Whitmore remained in his position. No formal action had been announced. Imani still faced side glances. Some employees remained loyal to management, convinced she had created chaos. She continued working. She documented everything: dates, conversations, witnesses. She did not raise her voice again. She did not need to. The story was no longer hers alone, but she also knew escalation meant risk. Public attention could bring change. It could also bring retaliation. At night, lying awake, she asked herself whether she was strong enough to endure what might come next. And she had started something that could not be easily controlled, and the cost of truth was still unfolding. By the third week, the pressure stopped being subtle. Management announced that an internal review would take place, but no timeline was given. Whitmore remained in his position. He continued attending meetings. He continued signing approvals. Nothing visible had changed. What had changed was Imani's isolation. The Henderson account was officially removed from her responsibilities. Two smaller, less significant tasks replaced it. Work that once challenged her now felt like a quiet demotion. No one said it openly, but everyone understood. Some coworkers had begun softening toward her, but others doubled down. One afternoon, during a team discussion, a colleague interrupted her mid-sentence and said, "Let's keep emotions out of this." The comment was unnecessary. It had nothing to do with the topic, yet it landed heavily. She finished her point calmly, but inside, and something cracked a little. At home, the strain was harder to hide. Her father's clinic visit brought new medication adjustments. The cost was higher than expected. The pharmacist explained the changes slowly, as if aware of how each price echoed in Imani's mind. Her mother tried to sound hopeful. "Maybe your office situation will settle soon," she said gently one evening. Imani forced a nod. She had not told her mother the full story. And only that there were issues at work. She did not want to add worry to an already fragile household. Every expense now felt sharper. Late one night, Imani opened her laptop and reviewed her bank balance again. The numbers were tighter than before. The project reassignment meant fewer performance bonuses. She calculated how long they could manage if her position became unstable. The answer frightened her. The social media discussions continued to grow slowly but not explosively. Some posts gained attention, others were dismissed. A few anonymous accounts questioned the credibility of the claims. Someone suggested that disgruntled employees often exaggerate. Imani read those comments quietly. Doubt began to creep in. Not about the truth, but about the outcome. What if speaking up changed nothing? What if it only damaged her career permanently? At work, Whitmore maintained a professional distance. He avoided confrontation. But his influence remained. She noticed she was no longer included in strategy meetings. Her input was requested less often. When she spoke, responses were brief. One afternoon, she overheard a senior staff member say, "This whole situation is affecting company morale." The tone implied she was the disruption. That evening, when she returned home, her father was awake, sitting in the dim living room light. "You look thinner," he said quietly. She tried to laugh. "Just stress." He studied her face carefully. "Sometimes doing the right thing is heavy," he said, "but carrying wrong is heavier." His words stayed with her. Still, the emotional exhaustion reached a breaking point a few days later. During a meeting, one of the women who had privately confirmed Whitmore's behavior avoided eye contact when asked about workplace culture. She hesitated, then said, "I haven't experienced anything inappropriate." Imani felt the air leave her lungs. Fear had silenced her. After the meeting, no one spoke to Imani directly. The unspoken message was clear. She was standing alone again. In the restroom, she stared at her reflection. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her shoulders looked tense even when she tried to relax them. For the first time since she had spoken publicly, doubt flooded her completely. Had she miscalculated? Had she underestimated how deeply people feared losing their own stability? Had she put her family at risk for something that might never be resolved? She returned to her desk and found an email from management reminding staff about professionalism and respectful communication. It was general, but the timing felt pointed. That night, she broke, not loudly, not dramatically. She sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. Bills were spread in front of her. The apartment was silent except for her father's distant cough. She placed her head in her hands and allowed herself to cry quietly. She was not crying because she regretted telling the truth. She was crying because telling the truth had not immediately brought justice. The loneliness felt suffocating, and the responsibility felt endless. She had wanted change, instead, she had uncertainty. The next morning, she considered something she had not allowed herself to think before: resignation. If she left quietly, the tension would disappear. She could search for another job. She could rebuild without the shadow of conflict. Her family would not live under the threat of instability. But leaving would also mean surrender. It would mean accepting that silence protects power. At work that day, and she kept her head down. She completed her assignments. She spoke only when necessary. The energy she once brought into the office was gone. She was functioning, not thriving. Near the end of the day, Claire approached her desk again. She looked more determined this time. "I'm filing a formal complaint," Claire said softly. "I was scared before, but I can't pretend anymore." Imani looked at her carefully. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded. "I won't let you stand alone." For a moment, Imani felt something shift, not a full wave of hope, but a small, steady warmth. The lowest point had shown her the cost of isolation. It had tested her strength. It had exposed her fear, but it had not erased her conviction. She realized that courage was not loud. It was quiet endurance when the results were uncertain. And even at her weakest, she had not taken her words back. Claire filed the formal complaint the next morning. This time, it was not anonymous. It included dates, messages, and a clear description of what had happened. Within hours, another employee submitted her own statement. Then another. The pattern that had once felt like whispers began to take shape in official documents. Management could no longer treat it as a rumor. An external review team was announced by the end of the week. The tone of the company-wide email was cautious but serious. Words like accountability, safe workplace, and confidential reporting channels appeared in bold. For the first time, the situation felt structured. In the office, the atmosphere shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Conversations were no longer dismissive. They were careful, thoughtful. Some employees who had stayed silent before began speaking quietly about their own discomfort in past interactions. The fear that had kept everyone isolated was slowly being replaced by shared recognition. One afternoon, during lunch, a group of employees sat together in the break room. No one was laughing loudly. No one was whispering. Instead, and they were talking openly about workplace boundaries. One person said, "We should have listened sooner." Another added, "It shouldn't take this much for someone to be believed." Imani did not speak much during that conversation. She simply listened. Later that evening, she opened her phone and saw that the social media posts had gained stronger traction. A former employee had written a detailed account of similar experiences from years earlier. The story had moved beyond isolated comments, and it had become a discussion about power and silence in professional spaces. A small hashtag connected the posts. It was not explosive, but it was steady. People were sharing it thoughtfully, not angrily. Journalists had begun asking questions in comment sections. Imani felt both exposed and supported at the same time. At work, Claire walked beside her more often now. Others began doing the same. It was not dramatic solidarity, it was a quiet presence, sitting at the same table, and including her in discussions again, asking for her input on reports. One morning, a senior colleague approached her directly. "I owe you an apology," he said plainly. "I doubted you. I was wrong." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Whitmore's demeanor had changed entirely. He was quieter, more formal. Meetings with him now include at least one additional staff member. His confidence appeared controlled rather than relaxed. The shift was visible. Then came the moment that confirmed the momentum had turned. An email announced that Whitmore would be placed on temporary leave pending investigation results. The message was brief, but its impact was immediate. The office did not erupt in celebration. Instead, there was a collective exhale, a release of tension that had built for weeks. Imani sat at her desk, staring at the screen. She did not smile. She did not react dramatically. She simply felt something inside her settle. But for the first time since she had spoken publicly, she did not feel alone. At home that evening, she told her parents more of the truth. Not every detail, but enough. Her mother listened quietly. Her father nodded slowly. "You stood firm," he said. "That matters." The turning point was not loud. It was not triumphant. It was steady. Support had moved from whispers to action, from doubt to documentation, from isolation to shared responsibility. The outcome was still uncertain, but the direction had changed. The final report came on a quiet Tuesday morning. No one knew the exact hour it would be announced, but everyone felt the tension building. For weeks, the external review team had conducted interviews, examined messages, and collected statements. Employees had been called in one by one. The process had been formal, structured, and serious. At 10:30 a.m., a company-wide meeting request appeared on every screen. Imani's hands rested still on her desk as she read it. Around her chairs shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stood slowly and moved toward the conference room. The room filled quickly. Some employees stood along the walls. The air felt heavy, but not chaotic. It was controlled anticipation. A senior executive from headquarters stood at the front. His tone was calm, measured, and direct. He thanked employees for their cooperation during the review, and he emphasized the company's commitment to professional integrity and safe work environments. Then he said the words everyone had been waiting for. The investigation had confirmed repeated violations of workplace conduct policies. The findings showed a consistent pattern of inappropriate behavior connected to professional advancement. Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore's employment was terminated. A quiet wave moved through the room. Not applause, not cheers, just a collective shift in posture, and as if everyone had been holding their breath. Imani felt her pulse slow instead of racing. She had imagined this moment in many ways: anger, relief, satisfaction, but what she felt most was steadiness. The executive continued speaking. He acknowledged the courage of employees who had come forward. He announced new reporting channels, mandatory training sessions, and leadership restructuring. There would be oversight, there would be policy changes, there would be transparency. And when the meeting ended, people did not rush out. Small groups formed naturally. Conversations began, honest ones this time. Some employees approached Imani directly. One woman said quietly, "You changed this place." Another added, "Thank you for not backing down." Claire stood beside her, offering a small smile that said more than words could. Later that afternoon, Imani was asked to meet with senior management. The request felt different from the one weeks earlier. There was no tension in the walk down the hallway this time. Inside the office, two executives sat across from her. They spoke openly about her performance record, her leadership during a difficult period, and the respect she had earned through integrity. They acknowledged that her promotion had been unfairly delayed. Then they offered her the senior associate position formally. No conditions, no hidden meaning, just recognition based on merit. She accepted calmly. There was no dramatic celebration when she returned to her desk, but something had changed permanently. The energy around her was different, not cautious, not skeptical, respectful. And by the end of the day, the news had spread beyond the office. The social media discussions shifted tone. Instead of questioning credibility, posts now discuss accountability and workplace reform. The small hashtag that once felt fragile had become part of a larger conversation. When Imani left the building that evening, the sky looked clearer than it had in weeks. She paused for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the cool air settle around her. And the confrontation that had started with a raised voice behind glass walls had ended with institutional change, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she refused to stay silent. The promotion became official the following week. Imani received a new contract, updated responsibilities, and a salary adjustment that finally reflected the level of work she had been doing for years. The change was not just symbolic, it meant stability, it meant breathing room. And her new office space was not large, but it had a window. For the first time, natural light reached her desk during the day. She noticed it immediately. The sunlight felt like a quiet reward. The workplace atmosphere continued to shift in practical ways. Clear reporting systems were introduced. Training sessions about professional boundaries became mandatory. Leadership was monitored more closely. Conversations about fairness were no longer whispered. They were structured and documented. Some coworkers who once avoided her now approached her for guidance. Junior staff asked her for advice on navigating workplace dynamics. She answered honestly but calmly. She did not present herself as a hero. She simply spoke about boundaries, documentation, and self-respect. Trust was rebuilt slowly. At home, the changes were more visible. When her first adjusted paycheck arrived, she sat at the kitchen table and calculated expenses again. This time, the numbers did not feel suffocating. She paid the rent without anxiety. She cleared the pharmacy balance without hesitation. She even set aside a small amount into savings, something she had not been able to do consistently before. Her mother noticed the difference immediately. "You seem lighter," her mother said one evening while washing dishes. "I feel lighter," Imani replied quietly. Her father's clinic visits continued, but the financial fear attached to them had eased, and her brother went on his school trip without guilt hanging over the expense. Her sister began tutoring sessions for math, her confidence improving week by week. The apartment felt the same physically, same walls, same small kitchen, but emotionally it felt steadier. One night, while helping her sister with homework, her brother asked an unexpected question. "Why were people at your job talking about you online?" Imani paused. "Well, because I told the truth about something that wasn't right," she answered simply. Her brother nodded as if that made perfect sense. "You did the right thing then," he said. The social media conversation eventually quieted. News cycles moved on. Other stories replaced theirs. But the internal impact remained. A few months later, the company published updated workplace standards publicly. It was not flashy, but it was real. Imani did not seek public attention. She declined interview requests politely. She preferred rebuilding her professional identity through consistent work rather than headlines. In meetings, her voice carried more weight now, not because it was louder, but because it had proven steady under pressure. Colleagues listened differently. They did not interrupt as quickly, they did not dismiss her tone. The most important shift, however, was internal. She no longer second-guessed her instincts when something felt wrong. She no longer felt the need to shrink her presence to make others comfortable. She had faced isolation and endured it. That knowledge settled deeply within her. One afternoon, Claire stopped by her office with coffee. I almost stayed silent, Claire admitted. I'm glad you didn't. Imani smiled softly. We both didn't. The resolution was not about revenge. It was not about humiliation or victory over someone else. It was about restoration. Her career moved forward on merit. Her family gained security. Her workplace became safer for others who might face similar situations. Life returned to routine, but it was a stronger routine, and this time, and it was built on truth. Months later, the office felt ordinary again. Keyboards clicked, phones rang, deadlines approached and passed. New employees joined without knowing the full history of what had happened. To them, the policies and structured reporting systems were simply part of the company culture. They did not see the cost behind those changes. Imani noticed it sometimes, the quiet difference. Meetings were more transparent, doors stayed open, and conversations about advancement were documented clearly. No one suggested informal support anymore. The shift was subtle but real. She still woke up at 5:15 every morning. She still prepared tea for her father. She still checked the calendar on the refrigerator. Life had not become easy. It had become steadier. Her father's health required ongoing care. Her siblings still needed guidance. Bills still arrived. Responsibility had not disappeared, but it no longer felt like a trap. One evening, and as she walked home from work, she thought about the moment she had opened that office door and raised her voice in front of everyone. At the time, it had felt reckless, lonely, risky. Now it felt necessary. She understood something clearly. Courage does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a tired woman refusing to accept what is wrong. Sometimes it looks like speaking even when no one immediately stands beside you. She had not changed the world, she had changed her corner of it, and that was enough. When she reached her apartment, her brother ran to greet her. Her sister asked for help with homework. Her mother called from the kitchen. Her father coughed gently from his chair. Imani stepped inside, closed the door, and felt a quiet sense of peace. She had chosen dignity over fear, and that choice had built a future her family could stand on.